Jana Yasodanan Jamuna Tira Di Jamuna Tira Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Bihari Jaya Nāmāparādha Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Vraja Kṛṣṇa also receives with AC Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai Nāmāparādha Haridas Thakur ki jai Prem Sagaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasri Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai Shri Sri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopida Shamakunda Radha Kuda Giri Govardhan ki jai Shri Vṛndāvana Dham ki jai Navadvip Dham ki jai Ganga Jamuna Tulasi Bhakti Devi ki jai Ananda Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai Samaveta Bhakti Vrinda ki jai Go Premanandi All glories to assembled devotees All glories to assembled devotees All glories to assembled devotees All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga All glories to Srila Prabhupada Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Namo Om Viṣṇu-bhakti Kṛṣṇa-bhakti Bhutale Śrīmate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityanamane Namaste Saraswata Devi Gauravani Prachadane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatadesha Tadane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasri Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Reading from Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 11, Chapter 3, Verse 7. Ittam kandatir gachan bhavabhadra vahapuman abhuta samplavat sarga pralayav asnute vasaha. In this way, karma gati, the destinations determined by his past activities, gachan, obtaining, bahu abhadra, much that is inauspicious, vaha, which involves, puman, living being, bhuta samplavat, until the dissolution of the created universe. Sarga pralayo, birth and death. Asnute, he experiences. Avasa, helplessly. Translation: thus the conditioned living entity is forced to experience repeated birth and death. Impelled by the reactions of his own activities, he helplessly wanders from one inauspicious situation to another, suffering from the moment of creation until the time of cosmic annihilation. Report. According to Śrīla Madhvacharya, after hearing that the living entity is repeatedly subjected to birth and death within the material world, if one still considers such a helpless entity equal to God in all respects, one will surely fall into the darkest regions of the universe from which it is difficult to rise. Translation: thus the conditioned living entity is forced to experience repeated birth and death. Impelled by the reactions of his own activities, he helplessly wanders from one inauspicious situation to another, suffering from the moment of creation until the time of cosmic annihilation. So this is a description of the force of karma on the living entity, which was explained in the previous verse, how he wanders around in the material world because of his activities. And the activities are caused by his desires. His desires are caused by his identity with the material body, which wants to get some enjoyment. So the propensity to enjoy is also there in the jiva. So that's the original cause. He wants to enjoy. That is also, we can say, natural to the jiva. So he is called a bhokta. A bhokta means one who enjoys. Bhokta. It has, of course, a bad connotation for us because we shouldn't be enjoying. We should give enjoyment to Krishna. But it is natural that the jiva has some experience. And that obviously the good experience for the jiva would be happiness. That's a natural tendency or the propensity of the jiva to have happiness. So, in other words, this is a constitutional aspect of the jiva, the capacity to experience happiness. And because he has that capacity, that becomes his desire. We don't want to have the opposite of happiness, distress or suffering. So, jivas desire happiness. So, this has its, of course, its positive and its negative aspects. So the positive aspect is that if we identify ourselves as a servant of the Lord, then we get that happiness in a natural way. If we do not recognize the Lord and we try to get the happiness, we end up in the material world. And then we end up in this situation. So that's the negative aspect of being a bhokta. We enjoy, and we enjoy for ourselves without the Supreme Lord. When we're in the spiritual world, there is enjoyment, but it's in relation to the Supreme Lord. So when the enjoyment was without the Supreme Lord, that is for the jiva himself, then we end up with these problems in the material world. So in that sense, the jiva is the cause of all of this problem in the material world, but then it spreads to his ahankara, and then to his desires and his mind and his actions, and then the karmas, the suffering in the material world. So all this is the result of that jiva and his capacity to be a bhokta. And if he chooses the wrong way and out of ignorance, then he ends up in this situation in the material world. One could criticize scriptures and say why we have to be so pessimistic and always say that the jiva in the material world is full of suffering and it's an awful place, etc. Because we see there is some happiness here, etc. And particularly if you're sattvic, you get some sort of happiness in the material world. So that is true, there is a type of happiness. But the Bhagavad Gita also points out that it is also temporary. And because it is temporary, it ultimately causes pain, because you lose your happiness and then you have to suffer pain. So therefore, it's not a very satisfying type of happiness, no matter where we go in the material world. So even if you go to Brahmaloka and you live for millions and millions of years, at a certain point, you have to give up that body. And that position and that happiness. So that is suffering again. We could always argue, well, I get to live a long, long time, on Brahmaloka, but unfortunately, that long time is just 100 years, like 100 years on Earth. So we experience it like 100 years. So again, it is, if you can live for 100 years here and then die and have pain. So that's what happens in Brahmaloka also. You get your 100 years in Brahmaloka, then you have to give up your body. So from our point of view, it looks very nice, but then from the higher point of view on Brahmaloka, it is, again, there's some problem there. So wherever we go in the material world, we have this problem. Nevertheless, as was pointed out, we condition ourselves to this material world, so even though there are problems, we ignore those problems and we think of the happiness that we're getting here. So the people in the hellish planets also think they're happy. They get their enjoyment somehow. They're called Bilasvarga, or the subterranean heavenly planets, because they get a sense of enjoyment just as the people in Svargaloka get enjoyment. Only difference, of course, is tamasic, whereas the enjoyment in Svargaloka is sattvic. But nevertheless, they're thinking, I'm enjoying. And again, the pig is enjoying, and the snake is enjoying, and the dog is enjoying, and they're all getting their enjoyment somehow in this material world. So the living entities become conditioned to their particular body, and there they get satisfied to some degree with this type of happiness. As a human being, people in ignorance also will be satisfied with this position, and they'll simply try to get some material happiness. That's their endeavor. And people in Rajagun also will try to get that type of happiness. People in Sattvagun, then they don't strive for that type of happiness because they understand they're not the body. So that is the good quality of Sattvagun. They strive for happiness inside rather than outside, from Atma rather than from external objects. So that's the good feature of Sattvagun. But then, of course, Bhagavad Gita also warns, even that is conditional. One gets conditioned to that happiness in Sattvagun, and then one doesn't want to leave that, so then one doesn't even get moksha because of that. One becomes attached to Sattvagun. So there's a problem even with Sattvagun. So in any case, the jivas are conditioned by their particular types of happiness in this material world. And it's very difficult for them to do anything else. They simply strive for that happiness birth after birth after birth. And so that is described here, how the living entity, until the end of the universe, they'll go taking body after body after body, living and dying, and they'll be taking body after body after body in this material world because of this attempt to get some happiness. So as I said, nothing wrong with that, but when you're trying to get the happiness in terms of a material body for yourself, this is a problem. So we can always argue, well, why did the Lord do that? Why didn't He make a nice situation so you don't have to suffer in the material world? And you can just get your happiness out of the material world. Unfortunately, we can say the material world is, its nature is this, because it is temporary. Everything in the material world is achit and changing all the time. If we want something permanent, then we have to have a spiritual thing. If it's a material, forms keep changing, and creation, destruction takes place all the time of all these forms in the material world. The only solution, of course, we would say Prakriti is eternal, yes. But everything after that's temporary. Mahatattva, ahankara, senses, bodies, material elements, everything is all temporary. Right? So, of course, we can argue, well, why not make everything eternal in the material world, all the forms, all the bodies, etc., whatever. So this is because the Lord has a particular plan for the material world. We can have one condition of perfect happiness, that's in the spiritual world. And anything else cannot be perfect. This is the definition of a Supreme Lord and relationship with the Supreme Lord. So anything other than that is not going to be perfect. So therefore he doesn't make and cannot make a perfect material world. Otherwise he'll have to make everybody into devotees, and then they can enjoy nicely in the material world. But if they're not devotees, then they have to have some other condition, and this is what he has done for them. So we can say it's a compromise. So you can get something almost like the spiritual world if you go to Brahmaloka. You can live a long time with a minimum of suffering. So he gives that option also. If you really, really want material world, then under certain conditions you can do that. You have to be very sattvic, of course, to do that. So there's an opportunity for that in the material world. But of course, we don't expect all jivas to strive for that. So he gives them alternative types of happiness on different planets, in different bodies, from the lowest planet on Patala Loka all the way up to Brahmaloka. So you've got opportunities everywhere within. That's his mercy. All jivas are not qualified for Brahmaloka, therefore he gives them their opportunities for happiness in other places. And they will get their material happiness, which is temporary, to greater degrees or lesser degrees according to their karma. In other words, they become responsible for the degree of happiness they get out of the material world. It's determined by karma. Karma is determined by their own actions. So they're responsible for their extent of happiness in this material world. So that's why we have the law of karma there. So the Lord gives some responsibility to the jivas. Well, of course, that's we can say their inherent nature also. Besides being a bhokta, the jiva is also a karta. He's a doer. And in doing actions, he makes a decision to do it. So he's responsible for his action. In the material world, of course, this is reflected into the body. The jiva is the doer, but then the body becomes the doer because it carries out the action. It's the instrument of carrying out the action through intelligence, mind, senses, action senses, everything like that. But then the actions are carried out in this world. But the original impetus comes from the jiva. He is the doer, ultimately. So we say a perverted reflection of bhokta and karta in the material world when the jiva tries to be happy by doing activities. To emphasize the fact that he has to be responsible as a karta, as a doer, then we have the law of karma. And he acts in one way, then he gets very nice results, and he gets to be a bhokta. And if he doesn't act in the proper way as a karta, then he doesn't enjoy as a bhokta as much. He gets a little bit of happiness, but not as much. And then he gets the opposite, suffering. So this is the structure of the universe that the Lord has created for the benefit of the jiva, to make him responsible and ultimately make him understand that everything in the material world is useless, which is this whole description. What is the material world? That's the question. Ultimately, it is maya, it is illusion, it causes problems for the jiva. Better get out of the material world. So the whole purpose of all of this structure of the material world is to educate the jiva so that he understands that he cannot be perfectly happy here. If he wants his happiness, he has to do something else. So that's the whole purpose of the material world from the Lord's point of view. So it's not just randomly getting stuck in bodies and suffering, but it's with a purpose to educate the jiva until he rises up to the level where he understands the material world is temporary and not going to give him ultimate satisfaction. And then he goes for other goals and other processes. So that's and to help the jiva, then we have scripture. In this case, we have King Nimi asking questions of the sages. So the sages give descriptions, like this description of Maya. What is it? So though the jivas on their own, as human beings, may think about the world and think it's useless and whatever, they don't quite know how it's operating. So that's why King Nimi asked this question, to clarify what is the nature of material existence. So once the sages answer, then he gets a very clear idea of what we're doing in this material world, why we have material bodies, what is the disadvantage of living in this material world with a material body, etc. And understanding that, then we have an impetus to do something else, that is, practice spiritual life and get out of this position of temporary happiness in the material world. So this is a type of knowledge which is essential for the jiva. Of course, we can say how deep we have to go. We don't have to understand it in too much detail. Some people like details, so therefore details are supplied, and then it discusses Maya and the different elements like Mahatattva and Prakriti and Ahankara and whatever, senses and sense objects and elements, etc. And gives a nice analysis of elements in the material world. And we can go further and discuss how they combine together and how they make bodies, etc. So it's all technical information. So the devotee really doesn't need all of that information. The main point he has to understand is the body and the material world can be an obstacle for the eternal happiness of the jiva. And therefore, we have to be very careful how we handle mind. But at the same time, just explained that we do not reject the material world completely. We do not reject the material body. We can use them in a certain way so they're also beneficial for us getting more knowledge and devotion. So we don't reject them also, but we have to use everything in the material world in a particular way so it doesn't create this situation. So that method is called Bhakti Yoga. We engage our senses and our body and our mind, and we engage material objects in the service of the Lord, offering it with devotion. And then we do not get this result of karma, getting forced into other bodies. But the action does not create this result. Rather, it has the opposite result. The actions of bhakti will destroy all the karmas that push us into bodies. So very, very effective process. So that's the whole purpose of these descriptions of material world here and how it operates, just to give us an understanding of that we do have to get out of this position of the material world. It's not favorable for our own good, for our own happiness. And at the same time, we don't reject it completely. We use it in a certain way, and then we get great advantage.
Other than dissatisfaction with our current state of happiness?
Well, for many people, that will be the initial, one of the initial things. Of course, it may be prior to bhakti also. In other words, to get to jnana, you have to be dissatisfied with the material world. Yeah? And then with that jnana, not the body, then we can go to bhakti. So for many people, why do they take to bhakti? Because they're suffering. They got problems. They don't like the situation here. So doing bhakti gives them a little bit of peace from that. So for many people, but of course that is mixed bhakti. Okay? So when we talk about pure bhakti, then pure bhakti is based on faith, and faith means faith in pure bhakti. So it's a step above that karma Mr. Bhakti or whatever like that. So that's a little bit rarer, but if that takes place, good fortune for the jiva. So there the impetus is not getting out of the material world or getting rid of the suffering or enjoying in the material world, anything. At that stage it's not, because we have that faith. Before that, then yes, we'll have these impetuses or whatever like that. Yeah, so we can observe that many people do not start out with pure bhakti. They start out with that type of mixed bhakti, and then through the practice of bhakti, then they understand what is pure bhakti and then begin to practice it.
Maharaj, regarding this word nāmāparādha, we hear that nāmāparādha means the offenses to the holy name, 10 offenses. But sometimes it is also interpreted as the name which is chanted while committing offenses. So does the word nāmāparādha mean just like nāmābhāsa? It's a reflection of the name. So nāmāparādha, sometimes devotees interpret it as the name which is chanted while committing offenses. Or does nāmāparādha mean the 10 offenses to the name?
Well, generally we're chanting the holy name, and then in chanting it we may have these offenses, we may be committing those offenses. It's a little bit difficult to understand that committing offenses would cause us to chant the holy name. Is that what you're saying?
Nāmābhāsa, we understand that it is a dim reflection. The abhasa is describing the name.
Yeah, of course, it may or may not have offense in it.
Okay, yes. But
so could be with like ajamil, no offense.
So when we say he's doing nāmāparādha, does it mean that he's doing the aparadhs itself, or is he chanting the name, or he's taking nāmāparādha, he's taking nāmābhāsa, we say. He's taking pure name, he's taking nāmābhāsa.
To commit nāmāparādha, you don't have to be chanting the name. Okay. So in other words, a demon offends a devotee who's chanting the holy name. So that's first offense of the holy name, because it's related to the holy name. Yeah. Ultimately, he's committing offense against the holy name because he offended the devotees chanting the holy name or preaching the holy name. But he doesn't have to be chanting the holy name. So that's where he's not doing anything in relation. Other ones, to consider the names of Shiva and Brahma to be equal. So he may be chanting and have that idea, so that's offense. He may not be chanting. And he just criticize the devotees. Actually, you're chanting the name of Kṛṣṇa, it's just like chanting the name of Shiva. So that's the case where he's not chanting, but he's committing offense against the holy name by criticizing the name and saying it's only equal to, Vishnu's name is only equal to Shiva's name or Brahma's name. So you don't have to be chanting. And same with these other aparadhas, like saying that it's exaggeration, like karma kanda. So you may be practicing and have that conception, so that's bad. Or you could not be chanting also and just criticize. The smartas may criticize chanting as just a sentimental process that gets you to Svargaloka, maybe not beyond that. So it's not superior to karma kanda. They may say that, but they may not be chanting. So.
Because some devotees, they say that we usually hear that there is the offensive stage, the clearing stage, and the pure stage.
Oh yeah, no, not necessarily.
Yeah,
like Ajamil didn't have an offensive stage.
Yes.
He just said nāmābhāsa, and then he came to pure name.
Right, but okay. So offensive stage.
Yeah, so it's not that we have to go through an offensive stage and then come to it. Maybe in previous lifetimes, maybe it was, but generally it's not that you have to go through all three stages. In fact, you can go opposite. You can be pure stage, then commit offense. Also, you can go backwards.
And Maharaj, we hear this in Nāmābhāsa, there is this helana.
Yeah.
Sometimes helana is translated as inattentiveness. And that same word inattentiveness is used for pramāda in the 10 offenses. So one is considered as nāmābhāsa while the other is considered as an aparadha. Why is that so, the inattentiveness?
Oh, well, in hela, that's a person, they're not a devotee, they're not intentionally doing a sadhana or anything, and they just say, oh Kṛṣṇa, I'm tired today. So they have no devotion in it or whatever, no faith in it, but they utter the name as a custom or whatever like that when they're tired or something. So that's what we call hela there. As far as devotees inattentive chanting, we're assuming that they're actually doing a sadhana of chanting, and then they're inattentive there. So they're not paying attention to it for some reason. So there's a little bit of a difference there. One is they're not, it's more like accidental chanting in the case of with no faith at all. The others, they do have faith and they're chanting.
And they're neglectful.
Yeah, and then they neglect it where they're supposed to chant with attention, but they don't. So then if they constantly do that, then it's called offense.
Yes. Maharaj, also in Tulasi Pranam, sometimes devotees, because we are worshipping Kṛṣṇa and we want to go to Vraja Kṛṣṇa we are worshipping. So they modify that instead of Viṣṇu-bhakti, they say Kṛṣṇa-bhakti pradayane.
Yeah.
So is that okay, or
Yeah, I think the original scriptural quote is Viṣṇu because it's related to the whole story of Tulasi coming into the material world, etc. But obviously, for us, we're worshiping Tulasi as an associate of the a gopi in association with Kṛṣṇa, arranging for the pastimes of Kṛṣṇa. So that is like that.
Thank you so much.
see that the entire process, what has been explained here is the Atma trying to get some enjoyment from the material world. That is the constitutional position, or say the reality what the Atma is facing in life. But this, when we are saying that the Atma has to do without expectation of any self-enjoyment, service for the Lord, how does this transformation happen to the Atma? And how long it takes for the transformation?
Well, the usual cause is agyata sukriti, accidental bhakti. Then the jiva gets a little favorability and develops faith and accepts the process of pure bhakti. But it takes many lifetimes because it's accidental, it's not intentional. So you may meet one devotee in a lifetime and it's accidental. You get some prasadam or something, but the next lifetime we don't know if you're going to meet a devotee or not. So over many, many lifetimes you get accidental bhakti, it accrues, and then the jiva begins to change a little bit and develop an interest in the Lord, a faith in the Lord. When it becomes strong enough, then consciously the person will think that, oh, yes, this is a nice process, that we practice the process, so that's faith. But it may take many, many lifetimes to do that.
So life after life, soul has to get that ajnana sukriti, not just once.
Yeah, usually many lifetimes, because accidental bhakti is not so strong. So they may hear the holy name, they may get prasadam, whatever, but they're not seeking it also, so it's, occasional only, and depending on the mercy of the devotee or whatever.